Hey everybody. Hey everybody, this is Joel, and I just want to kind of go over how to, another Photoshop video of how to make an image in Photoshop, and today we're going to be looking at coloring, what goes into coloring, and a little bit about compositing objects, but not too much. So this is the finished product here. And as you can see, it's a lot of little pieces that have all been put in there together. But we're going to be looking at coloring the spider over here, which is probably the most difficult object to color. So here's my image I've loaded in. That's the basic sketch. I flipped this already. You just go to Image, rotate canvas, and then you go 90 degrees south to southwest, typically, because that's just the way how my images are scanned with the printer. And then, you know, you go in, you darken things up, you go in with the eraser, you erase this there. So you can see there's just kind of outlines here from the printer. Just want to get rid of those, clean it up. Doesn't matter too much when you're going to be clipping the object out individually anyway, but you know, you still get some marks that appear here and there. I've already taken the liberty of darkening the image a little bit, you know, just because you want to make sure that's not cool, but you want to make sure that, you know, it's dark where it needs to be dark. Typically when things scan in, they're not as dark as they could be. But here I'm just going in and like very slowly darkening his kind of mouth tentacles here. The mouth tentacles have an interesting story. They, a long time ago, back when the Lord of the Rings movie, The Two Towers, was coming out, I was really excited for it, so I did a design for Shelob, which I was excited to see in that film. I had to wait another year to see, because it appeared in Return of the King, and was quite awesome. But yeah, so doing the design for Shelob, I kind of gave it this kind of tentacly cactus-like mouth, which you don't really see on the spider, but I thought would be cool, and that kind of came back into play here, something I did ages ago, but I thought, okay, why not? So you can see the tentacles are kind of getting a little bit darker there. I'm not going to darken everything just because, just kind of to demonstrate, you can just see the difference between the spider's body and, you know, the girl's hair or whatever. When I go there, and yeah, you see the girl's hair is darkening a little bit. So that's step one. And the next step is you're going to have to figure out how to change your colors, or how to pick your colors rather. And for that, you know, you get inspiration from all over the place. Usually if you just Google something and start with a reference point, like you Google in big tarantula or hairy tarantula or something, you'll get something. But this was neat. I went on a trip to Costa Rica, and I saw this guy at night, this spider, and it had exactly the color I wanted. That was exactly what I was thinking of. You know, he's got basically a brown body, but I wanted to see where the little specks of color came into play, these little orange specks, because I knew they were part of the spider, I just didn't entirely know how. And they're more kind of like a kneecap thing, you know, his body is brown, but like on his, like, these double jointed two kneecaps here, he's got, or she rather, this is a she, that's got these little specks of orange, and that's kind of a familiar image for a spider. So, yeah, it's a familiar image for a spider. So I wanted to go in and start putting that in. She's a lot darker brown than, you know, I would have, than it actually turned out to be in the image. Part of the reason for that is because when you're doing things cartoony, you kind of want to exaggerate things. Sometimes you want the color to pop more. And then, yeah, I would just go in here and, you know, use my fill tool, pick a nice brown, and start going all over the place. I think I actually ended up using a lighter brown than this. And then doing the same thing with, once I had done that, doing the same thing with my oranges, and then there's a kneecap, there's a kneecap, there's a kneecap, well, there's Well, that's an interesting thing too. If you accidentally click the fill tool where you don't want to fill, sometimes you get like neat effects like that, which, you know, depending on the color, you know, contrasting your black line and making your black line not a black line, but say, an orange line or a yellow line or a pink line. So sometimes by accident you'll click on something you didn't want to click on, and then you'll just get a cool effect. So that's what happens when I start filling in the spider. And when I'm done with him, he looks like that. And those are just basic single tone colors. Nothing really special going on there in terms of just, you know, single colors going in, boom, 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 filling them all in. As you can see, again, talking about the lines, I've used a lighter brown here. As you can see, I've used a lighter brown on these parts, so that, you know, just to highlight it a bit. So it's mostly a black line, but occasionally what I do is I would literally do something like this, where, see this top part, you can see there's a solid black line here. If I went with my fill command and tried to fill that in, it would fill in the whole spider with light brown color, but I didn't want to do that, so I just went with the lasso tool, and I picked an area on the screen, and basically anything I fill in is only going to be filled in up to this point. So if I went in and I tried to fill in this black line as an orange, it's only going to fill in anything in the circle that's touching the rest of that black line. And you can also, you know, adjust the opacity to see what it does for that. But that's how I got kind of the effect with the very tips of, like, the top, these little tufts of hair here are a lighter brown than anything else. So this is the first step to making my spider. And as you can see, I just filled in, you know, greens here, grays, but everything is basically just one color. There's no real shading at this point. Maybe I was shading around the eye. It's not really a big deal. And the next step was, this is testing with colors. I accidentally filled in too much with, it was either a black or a dark brown or something like that, so I got this effect, which was kind of a more realistic effect, but I wanted my spider, previous spider you just saw here, to have a bit more brown in him, or in her, probably a her. Yeah, you can see the difference there is, sometimes you get to a point where things will both look neat and you won't really know what direction you want to go in, but what I liked just well, just comparing these two really is that you can see more detail, you can see more of the line work in this one, and there's more variations in colors because you already have kind of a browny line over here. If I'm filling him all in that way, he just becomes like this big shaded mass. I didn't really want that. I wanted more of a big colorful mass for this spider. Yeah, as you can see, the difference too is these black lines, because the tolerance for the fill tool wasn't very stable. He's got more black around his tentacles here and stuff. You can still see these clearly, but this is a little more. This is something I would have had to go in and touch up later. Again, you can do things where you just lasso the part you want to darken or lighten, and you know, yeah, sure, why not create my own shadow? Yeah, you can just kind of, you know, fill in whatever part you want to fill in without it spilling over into something else. And that's what, and that's gonna kind of specifically tailor and target the way you're creating your image, just selecting those specific areas to color. So moving on, so I didn't decide to go with that, but the spider was still missing something, as you can see below. So what I did was I went in and I filled in the first step of my red. This isn't the completed red. I was doing this image and I didn't like how it was going. I didn't like just leaving it at this red, but I knew it needed some highlight, so I went in with one type of red. And as you can see, it also started to darken some of the mouth tentacles here. But I went in and just kind of put in that type of red. So if we go back to this image, not this image, sorry, wrong image there. Probably that one. Yeah, it can get tricky when you're dealing with 50 bajillion things in Photoshop to kind of figure out what you're doing. But what I would do then is I would go in with the magic wand here, and I would select an area that's already been colored. So let's say it's this, or let's say it's the back right here. And suppose I want to put in a color over top to give it a little bit of color dynamics and shading. So I'd select probably a blurry. These are nice. These these 20s, these 21s, depending on how big you want to get. Of course, you can adjust the size from there if you want. So maybe go in with 100, and I've already got my red, and it's in. I've selected it using the magic wand tool. So what I can do now is I can just kind of paint over without painting over any of the other details, and I don't necessarily need to make each piece of the spider its own layer. So I can just go in like this, and you see, giving him a little bit of shading, but still using that orange line, because if you see, we go back to my friend the spider over here. Is he here? Yeah. Go back to my friend the spider over here. Yeah, you can see a little bit. How his how her legs are. They're tiny little specks of. There's tiny little specks of highlights on her legs. I'm just trying to pause it so you can see it properly. There, you see little specks of highlights on her legs like that. So it's not one full solid dark color, but there's little outlines at the joint area, and I really wanted to go with that effect. And sometimes you find that sticking closer to life is better. Sometimes you find that moving away from life is better. It just all depends. Sometimes you need a shark to be blue instead of when it would normally be gray. And you just go in, and because it's got a soft edge, the brush I'm using has a soft edge. I'm using a 100 soft edge here. It gives it a really nice kind of idea that it's kind of like blending in. It kind of blurs over a little bit, so it's not like a solid hard line between the orange and the red. There's a little bit of space there. Okay, so getting off that, so that's what it would look like by the end of that stage. You know what, I might have even gone in and picked a darker brown for the face. I think I picked a different brown for the face just because you can see the browns for the face and the legs are different, just because I wanted to give it a little bit of differentiation. Make the face a little lighter so that you could see what was going on here. Yeah, and then on to the next step, where he's really, or she's really beginning to take shape. And what I've done here is I've gone in with another red, yet another red, and select that red, and go back to this image and show you. So if we were to take that, which was this finished spider from before, then I would just go in and I would do the exact same thing again, only the tolerance wouldn't be as, the tolerance here, it's only selecting the red I've already put in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing, same brush, slightly different shade of red. Maybe actually I'm going to pick a bit smaller brush. There we go. And there you see, I'm not going over into the orange, I'm not spilling into any black lines. I'm giving it enough to just darken that up a little bit, so there's a little bit, there's more depth to the colors that I'm putting in here. The same thing, just selecting it with the magic wand tool and just going in and darkening it up a bit. And sometimes what you want to do, what I might have done, I don't entirely remember at this point, but what I might have done was I might have even just taken this brush and just kind of dot. And the other thing too is if you're playing around with the opacity, you can go back in and you can darken it even further by just clicking. Yeah, and so that would have been that stage in the spider. So that would have taken us there. And then our final stage, which is this, final spider. This is basically more cleanup. As you can see, I've gone in and I've added some colors that weren't there, just changing the colors around. I've darkened the lines of all the tentacles here. I've gone in, I've put some shading on the face. The shading was a solid brown before, but I thought that when there's so much color depth to the spider behind, there should be some to this spider here, because if you go and you look back at one of the earlier images, you know, it's all just one kind of cartoon brown. You know, this kind of image too would work. These kind of just, you know, one color here, one color here, one color here, not really colors on top of each other, would work too, depending on what you're going for. But I don't know. I really felt for this one particular creature that I wanted to give it the impression that even though it's got a cartoony shape, that it has realistic spider colors, with a bit of interpretation, of course. And so that's what I did. I just went back in here and I gave her some more depth. And that's pretty much what the finished image ended up looking like. And the contrast to this was the little girls, which I'll get to in a minute. Okay, so here's our final image, and here's our spider. And if you look here in the layer section, very creative spider. This spider and the little girlfriend, because these were all drawn as like with similar images. You know, this little girl was part of the chimera up here, and this little girl was part of the image with the spider. So I just kept them the same. But if you wanted to really micromanage and play around with the size of the spider and the size of the girl as opposed to how you've drawn it, you can totally just click the image from where it was and play around with the size when you drag it onto your master image over here. Yeah, so there's the spider, and I guess the only other thing I want to just talk about is the kind of design of the creature a little bit more. So we'll go here. Hola. Yeah, so there she is, and you know, more or less looks like a spider. The real kind of thing that takes us into cartoony territory is the face. Just the idea behind the face was that spiders have like 18 million eyes or something like that. It's a slight exaggeration, but they have quite a few eyes. So I thought, well, we're doing a cartoon, why don't I do a whole bunch of different cartoon eyes? You know, have the like feminine girl eye up here, and like the big googly eye, and like this closed eye, and then, you know, an anime eye kind of thing over here, cat's eye, and then an eye full of eyes just to, you know, rub the point home. And of course the kind of cactus smile. I didn't really see this, but it almost comes across as like the spider smiling, because its cactusy mouth thing here is curling up at the side, even though it's kind of like all over the place. Yeah, and the idea, there's a little bit of color logistics in the chimera up here as well, but it's not as elaborate as the spider. I think it's because, but I think why I got away with this is because, you know, very basic, very simple colors, a bit of shading here and there, a bit of differentiation in the color lines. If you look at the lion's head over here. Yeah, so here's our lion. You can see like the lines here are different than the lines here, just to give it a sense of, you know, different sense of shading. Like the outline of the lion would be different than the actual brush strokes of the fur in his mane, stuff like that. But nothing as like layered and complex as the spider, apart from the fact that it's just essentially it's one image that's actually three images combined, which you have to be coloring. And then, you know, playing around with this fire effect. I wanted to do blue flame because I've been doing a bunch of orange flames for a while. Sometimes it just depends on me picking colors I haven't used in a while, which is getting harder and harder to do because these cartoons kind of branch out all over the place. Yeah, but so the complexity in this image is different than this, because the complexity here is you have three creatures mashed into one, and they all have to have some kind of contrast in colors. And originally how I approached this was I went to Google Images and I looked at images. I would type in bird, or I would type in snake, or I'd type in lion, and I would see what images would appear and which colors were the least likely to appear. And I saw very, very few green birds. Well, a couple of lovebirds popped up, but very, very few green birds. Most of them were like cardinals and sparrows and yellow birds and things like that. And I don't think I ever saw a snake with this particular pattern. There were a few blue snakes, a few yellow snakes, but nothing that really mixed that. There was more like red snakes and green snakes and things like that. So I picked opposite colors just because, I mean, why see something always as you would see it in real life? With the spider I really wanted to, but I thought it would be a nice contrast with the chimera if it was not that. And the interesting thing about the chimera too is it's not technically historically accurate. These three creatures were not technically the configuration of the chimera. I think it's like a goat, a dragon, and a snake's head, or something like that. But I thought, I don't know, I just felt when I was drawing it that the correct animals were a lion, some kind of fire-breathing bird, and cobra. Probably wouldn't have even been a cobra, the snake. But, you know, I thought that was fun, and I like the way the image turned out. So you don't always have to be accurate, you know, it just depends on what you're going for. I guess the only other real thing to show you is this girl right here with her best in show little gnome there, which is kind of an Easter eggy kind of idea from the yeah, you can see this is when we're talking about compositing. So nothing in this image is pretty much together. The reason being I wanted to do everything kind of separate. I was just going to use the original gnome from the Belligerent Gnomes cartoon and put it back in to this image kind of as a special treat, but I went back and I redrew him because I just wanted to draw him again and make him a little different. He's not colored as elaborately as that gnome, and this was because he was going to be a much smaller image and those kind of details would be lost anyway. As you can see, like, compared to the other images in here, it's a much simpler, just kind of like one-note gag thing that's going on here. It's a lot less elaborate than these two, but it's just a fun little punctuation mark for this whole cartoon. So I didn't go as elaborate with the shading as I did when it was a larger image, because, you know, that kind of detail would be lost. Sometimes you do go in and you do fun shading things, but in this case I didn't really. So yeah, you can see here there's a whole bunch of different elements. So what I would have just done is, when compositing this is all its own, I'm not sure if this is its own layer actually. This would either all be its own layer. No, it's not. It's all three separate layers and it's composited together to make one image. So I would clip out the girl, and, you know, if that piece of and I would just drag her over with the drag tool into the timeline. It usually appears as bigger when you want it, especially because I scan these in fairly high quality, so the images appear bigger, and you just shrink them down. And then for Nomi here, same thing. You just clip him, drag him into the timeline for your master. It's the same with the best in show. I drew two, and I wasn't sure which one I was going to use. But as you can see here, all of the coloring is done pretty much in this frame. There's touch-ups that I need to do later. I'll do that later before they're actual layers. But I'll color everything pretty much in the image here, and then I'll put it in the timeline for the master image. And then when it's in this timeline as a layer, then I'll just do things like I'll put in the background color and try to make sure everything matches up, and just make sure the images look congruous. And I think they look fairly congruous here. Things for like the skin. Every time I would need to color the skin of a new elf, I would just, you know, take my little pointer here, go in, and, you know, just use that fill for everywhere you see elf skin. So the elf skin all pretty much matches. Maybe this one's a little bit different. Yeah, it's a little bit different, but not really. which is okay, because a tiny bit of variation is fine. But so long as this is basically the same color, you know, you get the fact that. Talking about the design of images, I wanted to keep the elf girls all consistent, you know, no shading, just simple colors, just, they would be the really simple kind of images. It would be the simple cartoony figures in this, and everything else would be fairly more elaborate in this cartoon. And just having that consistency kind of goes with the whole contrast of, here you have a tiny little elf girl who's smooching a cobra on the cheek because she loves her pet chimera. I mean, who would love their pet chimera? Yeah, and then the banner up here was, this was the only thing I colored in my hand because I didn't really want to go in and, you know, make all these blue dots by hand. So I just freehand took a marker, went in, made a banner, put the words in, and then that became its own separate layer in the chimera. And as you can see here, what I was talking about, you have the gnome girl, the gnome, and they're two separate layers for what's happening over here. And if I zoom in, that's interesting. And then the best in show stamp as well is its own layer. So if I were to, for example, I can be very messy with my timelines and where like all the objects are, and just like in real life, when you're like cartooning in real life, you don't want your workspace to get too cluttery. I tend to fall into that kind of bad habit of letting all my tools clutter my workspace. Probably more so in Photoshop, because it's easy just to move them out of the way. But less so in real life. But okay, so you see she's here, and if I wanted to, I could go to the gnome girl, and I could move her around completely freely. And this is neat because I didn't entirely know how it was going to be. At first I thought, when I went in there, I drew them separately because I didn't really know where I was going to place all this stuff. Even though it's a few, I wasn't sure I was going to put her in front, put the gnome in front and have her just holding it like that, but then you lose like the feet and cute little elf shoes, so I was thinking that she maybe holds them up to the side, maybe she holds them up here. Originally I think I had him placed over here and her arms were just kind of floating, which I do occasionally in these cartoons, but I wanted to make it more like it would be in some form attached to this girl, so I just left it to the side like that, or, you know, whatever. And then the best in show, originally I wanted to place this on the gnome, the best in show, so I couldn't figure out where to put it. You know, do I stick it on his hat, or I wanted to, do I stick it to his belly, or do I put it on his foot? But when I kept trying all these different options, I kept finding out that I had to make everything smaller and smaller and smaller the more I put one thing on top of the other. In doing that, you do lose a bit of the detail. If you start with a really large image and you get really small, it becomes more pixelated and your details start to blur. Like for this, I had to go back in here and put back in the black line around his beard and his eyes and his nose and stuff, just so that detail would be completely lost. Because it started with a much larger, even though it was a simple image, it was a much larger image because of the quality at which I'd scanned it in. So that was a bit of a learning curve, I guess, on this one. That if you actually do shrink images down enough, they'll just be lost, because what you're doing is you're reducing it to simple pixels instead of, you know, something large like the spider, or even this girl here. She's really clearly defined. She's in the foreground and she's big. She's the only real small details that get lost are like the finer points of the lines, but they're simple lines anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But you know, you can see her face clearly, you can see her expression. The brush is all clear. It's a pretty clear image, whereas a lot of that gets lost on the gnome because it's much, much smaller. Even the girl behind here is a lot clearer than the gnome. But I didn't really want to shrink the gnome down anymore at that point, and I didn't want to shrink this down anymore at that point because of, you know, it says best in show here. That's the whole gag, and I could have gone back in, I guess, with with a word tool and put that back in, but I just didn't want to. I didn't want to lose any more of the image, so I stuck it on the girl instead. And yeah, that's just, I play around with things when I'm compositing. Again, the first time I started compositing was with the Rhino cartoon, and with the Rhino cartoon, I put one of the characters that was originally going to be, they were all going to be standing side by side by side by side, and I put the little baby rhino in the background. And you know, that's another thing, like figuring out where things go. So originally there was the idea that Chimera over here would go down in the front because, you know, he's the longer beast. But something about me, I don't know, it was partly because there was more elaborate coloring on the spider, and I wanted to show them off, and also, I don't know, it's just cute, the little girl and her spider being down up front. I don't know, I just wanted to put these characters up front. And as you can see, she didn't really need to be a part of the spider image. I put her in, like, I kept her in as part of, like, this one image. You see, I move it around, they both move together. For completeness sake, it just made my life easier. But when you have objects interacting, typically you want to draw them together and not composite them. Like I knew this little girl had to be kissing this snake. They had to be connected and part of the same image because you want their expressions to match. You don't want it to look like it's composited, which I think by and large it doesn't. I mean, you can tell they're all different objects, but I think they all belong in the same universe. And I think it's partly because of these little girls, which keep this kind of consistency of this crazy elf pet show where they have magical chimeras and giant spiders and belligerent gnomes and all sorts of things. Oh, that's another thing. Originally, I was going to have another beast in here. It's going to have like a minotaur or something. Or I was going to have, before I thought of the chimera, I was going to have like a Cerberus, but I think I'm saving, what I eventually decided was I'm going to save Cerberus, a Cerberus character for a later image, which hopefully you'll see. But yeah, I wanted to keep, you know, these two had to be drawn together so that I could get their expression right. And because it's, the other thing too is like the lips are planted on his cheek here, but you don't want it like to draw her face puckering and then just kind of stick this girl next to the snake, because then it'll just look put on top, and you want the images to interact. And just the idea too of like how would the snake be reacting. Like I thought it would be funny at one point if the snake was snarling and she's pecking him on the cheek, but I think it works better if, you know, I already had two halves of this horrible animal snarling and breathing fire and stuff, so it was funny to me to, you know, make the cobra the one with the smile on its face. Because if you're thinking about it, what would you rather kiss? Like a big cuddly lion, or some kind of, you know, some kind of weird parakeet bird or something like that, or, you know, a snake? You're probably never going to want to kiss the snake, no matter how cute it is, and no matter how non-venomous. But the idea of the girl actually giving a kiss to her pet venomous snake, that was funny to me. That she would pick that end and the other two ends would be snarling, and this just kind of became this end. Because snakes are the kind of, they're animals that I feel that compared to the other two, just in terms of idea, they will strike the most. You know, a lion, you know, if you're threatening it, will get defensive, or like some kind of bird will get defensive, but like so long as you keep your distance, that's fine. But snakes kind of have a more vicious, I guess, there's a more idea about them being vicious and kind of lashing out and striking in the popular mindset, so I wanted to go with that. But yeah, that's basically, you know, all the steps that go into coloring, all the different colorations involving the spider, and a little bit about how these images are all composited. I'm doing more and more compositing now because I like to draw bigger and bigger images. I like using the whole paper when I make an image, and you know, each image is a standalone idea in and of itself. You know, this spider is an idea, this chimera is an idea, these little girls are an idea, the banner is an idea to some extent. So when I'm drawing one idea, I wanted to devote an entire page to that idea and not just make a smaller, less detailed chimera and a smaller, less detailed spider. I'd rather make a bigger spider and then shrink him down.
And when you pull them into the timeline, they are quite large, and they do tend to take up a majority of, like, a great deal of the space, and you have to shrink them down quite a bit. But it also helps you figure out what size proportions are correct, things like that. So yeah, that's been this behind the scenes at what goes the step-by-step process of coloring and compositing, and you know, that's how you make an image. It's one of the images I'm more proud of. That's how it was made. So keep looking at the site, keep seeing how, keep tuning in to see how things update. I'm going on a bit of a hiatus now, but you know, hopefully when I'm feeling better after this whole withdrawal thing resolves itself, and I get new depression treatments, that you know, I'll start to be feeling better and more like my old self, or more like a new self of mine, and I'll start to be getting back into the habit of putting these out every single day. But yeah, for now, that's a behind the scenes video. That's, you know, what goes into making an image in terms of the coloring and everything. Yeah, turn up the happy.